Good morning to all, and welcome to the St. Macrina Center's June seminar on Gregory of Nyssa's work on the making of man. We are pleased and honored to be led this week, will be 5 sessions, be led this week by David Goa, one of the founders of the center and a good man. David, please.
Thank you, Andrew. Lovely to see each one of you. The book, of course, this is the, I suppose, most recent edition, although it's a double publication, having the Hexameron in it of St. Basil of Caesarea, along with St. Gregory of Nyssa's On the Making of Man. It's the same translation that one can find in volumes 5 and 8 of the Nicene and Post-Nicene Fathers, which was published many, many years ago. It is a lovely thing to be able to just dwell with these extraordinary texts that are at the heart of the Christian tradition. So this morning, I would like to make a few introductory remarks and then speak. And I may do this each morning. I may speak just for a few moments of St. Gregory. I sort of consider him one of my friends, and I think all of us can consider him one of our friends. It's lovely to know these men and women that are part of our spiritual ancestry. And then we will each day consider a set of the chapters, as they're called, usually 15 pages, something like that. Today it'll be chapters 1 through 6, and we'll walk into those and seek to hear St. Gregory and to deepen our understanding of what he is suggesting to us. A couple striking things to me, just by way of introduction. Perhaps you have things like that you would like to say as well. I'm always a little taken aback at the attentiveness and engagement of both Gregory and his brother Basil, as well as Gregory, St. Gregory Nazianzen, and the Cappadocians, at their remarkable engagement in the natural world, in the world that they walked every day. It's beautiful, beautiful to see, and a lovely invitation to us to also walk the world that way. I've had the pleasure of being in Cappadocia on a number of occasions. And in his city, Nyssa, the ancient city of Nyssa, is the modern city of Nevşehir. And I've been invited there on several occasions to speak at the university and then to wander that world a little bit. That world now, of course, is a world that is foreign, bereft, one might even say, of Christians, except for tourists that come. It's completely Islamic at this point, but it's an interesting part of the Islamic world in that Islam in Turkey is deeply influenced by the Sufi tradition, the mystical tradition of Islam. And there's synergy between that tradition and the Christian East, or so it seems to me. St. Gregory also takes the science of his day, which was substantial, and the philosophy of his day seriously, seeks to engage seeks to understand, and seeks to respond to. I also am touched by his modesty and how he signals to us when he's inclined to just speculate a little bit. Maybe it's this. It's a lovely way of being clear about where you're at. Of course, the title of the text, The Making of Man, making is itself such an interesting word. In some ways, it indicates that it's never done. There is something ongoing always. And of course, man in this matter is not a matter of gender, but as it often is in the ancient world, is really a reference to the human nature. St. Gregory is thinking about what our nature is as created beings and how our maturing in and through personhood arises. An issue that the Christian East is, I think it's in its center of its wheelhouse. It's one of the gifts of the East. There's also in this text a consideration a little bit down the road of issues of sex and gender, images of multiplicity and unity, complexity and singularity. These are issues that are often present in the patristic writings, and we'll have a chance to wrestle with them a little bit. And then, of course, what do we really mean by intelligence? What do we really mean by reason? I've included in what I sent out definitions of intellect and reason and logos drawn from one of the volumes of the Philokalia. And we can refer to those periodically as we move along. But first, let me say just a little bit about our spiritual ancestor who we have a chance to walk with today. The Cappadocians were there in the crowd at the beginning of Christianity. We read of them in the Epistles to the Acts. Christians first encountered the people of this landscape in its formative texts of the church in the Acts of the Apostles, Acts 2:9, the gathering of the disciples of Jesus Christ following his ascension into heaven and the descent of the Holy Spirit upon them, so that they could speak a word of hope, a word of joy, a word of love to those who gathered from many regions scattered throughout the Roman Empire, including from various sort of barbarous lands. The Cappadocians are mentioned here. And by the mid and late 3rd centuries, historians record a variety of Christian communities in Pontus, up near the Black Sea, where St. Gregory's family had an estate, and in Cappadocia, where they also had an estate. His family had been Christian, at least since the 3rd century. So he grew up in that family and in a Christian culture. But we have to remember it was still a culture very much being formed by the Christian revelation, and in which that revelation is being given some shape and texture in the context of the Roman Empire. So Gregory had relatives who had been persecuted and killed, and the family estate had the relics of quite a number of saints from that early period. The city of Nisa, contemporary Nevşehir, in northwestern Cappadocia, entered our sort of historical understanding when Gregory became its bishop, initially in 372 through 376, then again in 378 through 386. He's a theologian, of course, but we have to be careful about what we mean by theologian. We'll have a chance to talk more about that. He's the youngest of the Cappadocian fathers, and he was born in the region of contemporary Neo-Caesarea, contemporary Caesarea, if I recall correctly, probably about 335. So that would have been 10 years after the Nicene Creed. So Christianity, I mean, my own sense is that the Christian understanding is obviously never fixed, because it's not an intellectual system. It's always revelatory. It's always shedding light and becoming and making all things new. He died sometime after 394. So he lived a reasonable life for the ancient world, but not a particularly long one. And his feast day is on the 10th of January. And he's one of 9 children, including his older brother Basil the Great, and of course his sister Macrina. And he was Macrina's student. This is one of the lovely things about the Cappadocians, both Gregory as well as Basil. Basil got a chance to go off to Athens and study at the great philosopher's school there. Gregory never had that opportunity. But both of them were taught by Macrina, the younger, who Gregory always calls the true philosopher, sees her as Socrates, as the one that had really understood the revelation. So we are in the presence here of a man who was taught by his sister, who is a treasured saint within the Christian East, particularly, and also in the West. So this morning, we have 6 of these chapters before us, which build on Basil's Hexameron, Basil's reflections on the 6 days of creation. The first one, wherein is the partial inquiry into the nature of the world, and a more minute explanation of things which preceded the genesis of man, the genesis of the human nature. Genesis, the book of Genesis. It's always fascinated me that the Jews, the rabbis, say that you should master, nobody masters, of course, the whole of the scripture before you read Genesis or Ezekiel or the Song of Songs. So that's a bit of a trying to draw our attention to the nature of this text and what really is it calling us towards. So this is the book of the generations of heaven and earth, as it says in Genesis 2. And it builds on Basil's reflection on the wonder of all of it. That the heavens and the earth, that all things are created by God, that they all were created in the beginning, and that all creation is seen as the offspring. And this is an image he plays with, and I hope throughout the week we can begin to grasp the gravity and reason for it. That all creation is seen as the offspring of rest and motion. He suggests, of course, that heaven and earth are in some sense opposites of each other, but nevertheless, heaven and earth share in each other. This is an enduring theme in Eastern Christian thought. The genius of particularity, that all particularity really counts. And then the way in which the particulars dance together, the movement that they have together. Heaven and earth share in each other. And this notion of the way heaven and earth shares in each other will play itself out through his work on the making of man as foundational, because within the human person itself, there is the play of the soul, the body, the mind, the senses. There is the dance of lightness and motion, the affinity of each to the other. Is what he calls the borderland of the opposition between operations, at once united in itself and dividing things that are naturally distinct. Again, this sense of, I don't know what else to call it, but the play of creation, the play of the particularities. So, contraries, or what appears to be contrary, are in fact mixtures, each with the other, so that in all, we see in the world a kind of mutual agreement, separate yet at union with itself. Gregory says in this text that the earth is stable without being immutable. Well, the heaven, in the contrary, as it is not, it has no mutability, so it has not stability either. That the divine power, by interweaving change in the stable nature and motion with that which is not subject to change, might, by the interchange of attributes, at once join them both closely to each other and make them alien from the concept of deity. It's important for us to wrestle with this because it really does play throughout the text. This notion of opposition and affinity, of motion and rest. And then at the end of the text, and we'll read that, he speaks about all creation having come to be. And then he has this haunting line. I was so moved by it. And none there was to share it. And none there was to share it. I was reminded of the great Jewish writer Elie Wiesel in his lovely meditations on biblical characters in his book, Messengers of God, Biblical Portraits and Legends. And in the first one on Adam, he begins his meditation on Adam by saying, Adam was alone as God is alone. And none there was to share it. In a way, this is it's sort of at the very foundation of the revelation that the human being, that God creates the human being out of the desire for communion, to share the world. So let's read some of it together. Um, the first one is begins, of course, on 165. I've suggested just portions of some of them so we have time to chat about them, assuming that you've read them. And we will read just portions of them. This first one, to me, it's so much of it is like a hymn of delight and joy in creation. So I'll kick this off just by reading from page 167, the full paragraph on that page through to the end. And then we can think out loud a little bit about it. Now all things were arrived at their own end, the heaven and the earth, as Moses said, were finished, and all things that lay between them, and the particular things were adorned with their appropriate beauty. The heaven with the rays of the stars, the sea and air with the living creatures that swim and fly, and the earth with all varieties of animals, plants and animals, to all which, empowered by the divine will, it gave birth together. The earth was full, too, of her produce, bringing forth fruits at the same time with flowers. The meadows were full of all that grows therein, and all the mountain ridges and summits, and every hillside, and slope and hollow, were crowned with young grass, and with the varied produce of the trees, each rising from the ground, yet shot up at once into their perfect beauty. And all the beasts that had come into life at God's command were rejoicing. We may suppose, and skipping about, running to and fro in the thicket in herds according to their kind, while every sheltered and shady spot was ringing with the chants of the songbirds. And at sea, we may suppose, the sight to be seen was of the like kind, as it had just settled to quiet and calm in the gathering together of its depths, where haven and harbors spontaneously hollowed out on the coasts, made the sea reconciled with the land, and the gentle motion of the waves vied in beauty with the meadows, rippling delicately with light and harmless breezes that skimmed the surface. And all the wealth of creation by land and sea was ready, and none was there to share it. Any initial thoughts? Does it incline you towards? What do you hear in him?
I hear images. It's the text really speaks to I don't know if it's a description. It's more of you're led into images. You're led into pictures. So maybe the texture that the description gives you gives dimension to the text, to the what you were
Mhm.
reading. I was having pictures, images.
It was like beautiful poetry. And I like what Sylvie is saying, and uh, listening to you read it. My text hasn't arrived yet, just full confession. Um, but being drawn into the landscape, the love of the piety, the poetry of the piety, and then that line, and now there was, uh, uh, and none there was to share it. I felt the grief in that line after hearing all the beauty, and none there was to share it. So that's sort of like empathy for God's desire for communion with us.
For me, I felt as you were reading it, I felt the rest, right? I felt the
Oh,
joy. I felt the overflow of peace in all of creation. I felt like it was an overflow of love within the divine that came out in beauty. And like what Tara was saying, like after it's all out there, right? If the creator is creating this beautiful um quote unquote art or yeah, a piece of art that's so balanced, so harmonious, so heartfelt from a place of peace, from a place of rest, from a place of joy that overflows. And then the last line that says, and none was there to share it. It's like I felt like the divine was saying, there's so much good, there's so much love, there's so much beauty that I want to give, that I want others, right, to experience, and yet none is there to share it. Um, that's how I felt when I read that.
it's interesting. You know, often when we read the creation narrative and what unfolds on each day, and you've really pointed to this, we tend to think it's linear. And then we come to the day of rest, Shabbat. But what you point to, Unica, is the singularity of the divine that's understood by the Cappadocians, that this movement isn't there because it's all pure presence. And so the creation is, in that sense, that's beautiful. The creation is made out of Shabbat, out of rest. out of the simple delight in present being. But also, oh, I'm sorry, please.
As I was reading this, I really thoroughly enjoyed this language, skipping about, running to and fro. What came to my mind was Joseph Haydn's The Creation, where
Yeah.
where he musically portrays just this virgin nature, as it were, and just playful enthusiasm. And what I saw at the end was an expectation of, with this similarity and differentiation that had been created, what is the true unifying factor? Um, that's how I saw that, just a joyful expectation of the binding of all creation, as it were. But the playfulness was just absolutely a joy to read as well.
The word Cappadocia means land of beautiful horses. And when you're there, you see them all over the place. Yeah, thank you.
One other thing to note, but I want to turn it back to you, David, and ask your sense of this. Just flag it for a moment. The language at the beginning, all things were already arrived at their own end. That phrase, at their own end, or really their own end. What do you hear echo in that word end? It's probably telos, but it's not finishedness because we're talking about ongoing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I was thinking, not finishes, not finality, fullness, perfection, flourishing, as long as perfection doesn't mean inert, identified in movement. And then at the bottom of that page, just two other bits. The third line from the bottom, just settled to quiet and calm in the gathering together. The gathering together. And then the word reconciled in the final line on the so this is gathering, and like someone said, the principle of gathering, which you will talk about, is very, very curious. But also this idea of reconciliation rather than negation, and what it means to come to their end and yet still need, or not, still partake of reconciliation and playing and so on. So that's why I would open it up for you.
Yeah, it's this, and earlier in the text, he talks about borderlands. And this will emerge again. All that is exists in relationship. And it is the movement and rest, the relationship in which that takes place. Where reality is, I think, is my best way of thinking about it. So we the particular is a wonder, but the particulars in their relationship to each other is a wonder of wonders. If I could just come back to Tara for a minute and your earlier comment on none there was to share it and what you sensed there. When we think of our relationship to the life of the world, this is a kind of meditation on the beginning of it all. But when we think of it, there are times, alas, when we don't share it. This is not this is not obviously a historical account. It's a spiritual meditation. And so you sensed a kind of sadness in it. And I think that sadness is there, and it's there in Gregory, as we'll see as we move along, in his sense that we can become captives of our own passions in ways that remove us from the world. We no longer share in the world. We become infatuated with something that's not real. And it deprives us of ourselves, deprives us of creation, deprives us of God, all in the same act. That's lovely. Provocative.
Can I go back to what Dr. Andrew mentioned?
Please.
Because as he was speaking, and I was drawn to what has already happened, right? Now all things were already arrived and at their own end. And then as I went back through the paragraph, I highlighted like what was already arrived. And I looked at certain um, verbs, right? They were adorned, empowered, full, crowned, risen, rejoicing, settled to quiet and calm, reconciled, wealth. Like just picking out those, what was already given to us, what was already provided before we were even created or made. And how beautiful it would be for us to live from that place of knowing it has all been, given. We're adorned. The world is adorned. Um, so that's like I felt like that was such the heart of the creator. That is to provide all of those things, right, from a place of abundance. So I just wanted to thank Dr. Andrew for bringing my attention to those things.
One more note, not quite in response to that, but also earlier. I like that, first of all. It's good that we pay close attention to the text. The wording used, it is translated from another language into English. The English is a very fine English, though, a very fine English. So we can trust the coherence of the English. Sylvia, at the beginning, you said it's almost like an image. And this word is important, and David's played with it a little bit already. We need to think about image this week in the image of God. But also, in a manner of speaking, an image just means icon in Greek. In a manner of speaking, we know in terms of images. The church knows in terms of images. And we hold this image next to this image, and we see how they relate to each other, how they inwardly form each other, how they respond to each other. Just like Gregory is saying, even with apparent contrarieties, there's something there. He calls his work a discourse at the beginning, following the flow of thought. He also calls it a consideration, which is to look at something from many different sides, right? Which he does. To think in terms of image is kind of to add another layer to our hermeneutic approach. And it's very good, very important. This thinking is not necessarily connected as in an argument or a disquisition. It's imagistic, it's not imagistic, it's of icons as well. And that means of our own, for we are an image, an icon. That's all. I like how you open that up, Sylvia. Thank you.
The last,
Yeah. Go ahead, Candy.
last sentence. And all the wealth of creation by land and sea was ready, and none was there to share it. Sounds to me as if Prevenient grace, was first etched in nature.
Mm.
That even before we came on the scene, all things have been prepared. That's insightful.
Yeah.
Can I add to that? If it was ready, it means there is a maturation. There is a time when things are ready. So there is also the notion of time, or
Yeah.
the notion of there is a time for everything, and when it's ready and it does not happen, what is that? What is missing if it does not happen when it's ready? So I don't know. Just
And
Mm-hmm.
Sylvie, what do you think? Do you think that's what the first sentence of that paragraph means?
which
What?
first sentence?
Sorry, let me read it. Now all things were already arrived at their own end. Does that mean ready for relation?
I
Right?
don't know. I don't know, but
That
I'm
might
wondering.
be a way into, yeah, ready to enter into relation. And then that
So it
strange being
implies
man. Go on.
it implies that there is a time where you're not ready. What does it mean? I don't know.
At least there's a time when you are ready.
The human being enters at that moment of readiness.
Yeah.
The human being is formed as a form of ready response. That's really good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I also like the language that David used earlier, and I was struck. I love everything about the water. So the statement made the sea reconciled with the land. And when David said where reality is, it's sort of this sense of the very slow moment, the presence, and the what a powerful importance the sea reconciled with the land, like that function of the wave lapping onto the shore, is such a, you know, it can only be the moment. It can't be beyond just that exact second.
Yeah. Shall we go to chapter 2? Page 168. Why the human nature appeared last after the creation. Here Gregory is speaking of the advent of creation. Advent. The way the pathway of creation was prepared by God, the preparing of what he refers to as the royal lodging, so he could manifest man in the world. The earth, a royal treasure house, an abundance for enjoyment, from which the knowledge of the giver and the beauty and majesty of what is, all of it is a theophany. All of it is a showing forth. All needs to be prepared for the arrival of the King. Gregory says that God manifests the human nature. He gives him, the human nature, as foundations, the instincts of a twofold organization, blending the divine with the earthly that by means of both he may be naturally and properly disposed to each enjoyment, enjoying God by means of his more divine nature and the good things of earth by the sense that is akin to them. Just, and I want us to read the whole of this section. Maybe Unica, would you be able to read this one for us?
Yes, absolutely.
So just let me suggest one thing. When we think of this twofold organization, as he calls it, one cannot help but think of the twofold person of Jesus Christ. And one of the great insights of the Christian tradition, because the Gospels, or so it seems to me, the Gospels are a kind of midrash on Genesis 3. It's a retelling to some extent of this narrative. What does it mean to be human? And so just bear that in mind with this twofold organization. Unica, would you read this one
Yes.
for us?
Why man appeared last after the creation. For not as yet had the great and precious thing, man, come into the world of being. It was not to be looked for that the ruler should appear before the subjects of his rule. But when his dominion was prepared, the next step was that the king should be manifested. When then the maker of all had prepared beforehand, as it were, a royal lodging for the future king, and this was the land, and islands, and sea, and the heaven arching like a roof over them. And when all kinds of wealth had been stored in this palace, and by wealth I mean the whole creation, all that is in plants and trees, and all that has sense and breath and life. And if we are to account materials also as wealth, all that for their beauty are reckoned precious in the eyes of men, as gold and silver, and the substances of your jewels, which men delight in, having concealed, I say, abundance of all these also in the bosom of the earth, as in a royal treasure house. He thus manifested man in the world to be the beholder of some of the wonders therein, and the Lord of others, that by his enjoyment he might have knowledge of the giver, and by the beauty and majesty of the things he saw might trace out that power of the Maker, which is beyond speech and language. For this reason, man was brought into the world last, after the creation, not being rejected to the last as worthless, but as one whom it behoved to be king over his subjects at his very birth. And as a good host does not bring his guests to his house before the preparation of his feast, but when he has made all due preparation and decked with their proper adornments his house, his couches, his table, brings his guest home, when things suitable for his refreshments are in readiness. In the same manner, the rich and munificent entertainer of our nature, when he had decked the habitation with beauties of every kind, and prepared this great and varied banquet, then introduced man, assigning to him at his task not the acquiring of what was not there, but the enjoyment of the things which were there. And for this reason, he gives him as foundations the instincts of a twofold organization, blending the divine with the earthy, that by means of both he may be naturally and properly disposed to each enjoyment, enjoying God by means of his more divine nature, and the good things of earth by the sense that is akin to them.
Thank you. Just two of the elements that really are striking to me. He thus manifests man in the world. Why manifests? To be the beholder of some of the wonders therein, and the Lord of others. That's also twofold, isn't it? To wonder, the gift of wonder. I mean, that gives us our science, as well as so many other things. And also then he speaks of the Lord of others. Lord, like God is the Lord. That's different than what we normal way we think of rule. So this notion of authority or authorship, maybe something we should consider as we move along. And then the other one that is striking to me on close to the end, then and prepared this great and varied banquet, then introduced man, assigned to him as his task, as his vocation, as his work, not the acquiring of what was not there, but the enjoyment of the things which were there. So sin in our tradition is that move whereby we seek to acquire things that aren't there. That is, we step into a world of our own making. And in so doing, out of the world of God's making. So what do you make of the central issue here that it says that he gives the human nature as foundations? The instinct, it's curious what that word was in Greek, I'm not sure, of a twofold organization, blending the divine with the earthly, that by means of both, for us human beings, the divine is not greater than the earthly. Or is it? I suggest to you. By means of both, we may be naturally, out of our very nature, and properly disposed to each enjoyment. They're both only properly engaged as enjoyment. Enjoy. Enjoying God by means of his more divine nature and the good things of earth by the sense that is akin to them. What do you hear? Welcome, Robert and Jeremy, by the way, and Leah. What do you hear?
I really love this. I love what you're saying, David, and that I was struck by this language of the munificent entertainer of our nature, this the rich and munificent. And munificence is this larger and more generous than necessary. It's such a powerful description of this God who is giving and creating our nature. And the word entertainer, and when you say joy, in my wheelhouse in the attachment science area and relational science, the word delight is so important, and there's this honoring of this munificent entertainer. It's just beautiful, the shared delight that we can be drawn to notice.
I was taken aback by the word entertainer, which probably shows you that I'm much more a creature of our time than I would want to admit to be. But then it occurred to me, what is an entertainer in this sense? To enter in, the one that is able to enter in, be a part of, pull forth the excellence. So, Andrew?
Thank you. I want to just make a couple of notes and then turn it back to you, David, to make some more connections. First, this twofoldedness is not dualistic.
Mm-hmm.
It's not Gnostic, so we have to hold that in mind. Something else is happening there. And this idea of creation as both gift and task, but the task is enjoyment, participate in the ongoing joyful making of the world. But it's both gift and task. And it reminds me of Gregory's preface a little bit when he speaks of his brother Basil's work as being both a gift, but then, as it were, making demands. We have to rise to that which is given. We need to partake of it. And in order to do that, we need to work too. Right? And like he says in the preface, we don't just sit inert and quote from somebody else and borrow. We need to actually partake of this same thinking, this same making.
What I love about that is the partaking of it is from a place of rest. So the motion that we are tasked with comes from a posture of receiving, of enjoying, of being at rest, not in acquiring and striving that which is not yet there, but from what has already been there or is there, to engage with it, knowing that it's an overflow of abundance, if that makes sense.
Mm.
That's what I sense from here. And I'm loving the repetition in this whole section or chapter 2, like enjoyment, 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 right? Enjoyment is like written 3 times plus enjoying. And if that's our task, then it's not to say that it's not an engagement of it, but how do we enter in? Like, that's why I love also entertainer, because it flows from being a really good host. So the entertainer was a host that prepared his house for the guest, that the guest can relax in and enjoy all that has been provided, and in that engage in relationship. So I think this is so beautiful, and it ties in with what Sylvie said before about timing, right? The timing is for us. So all that God prepared was for us. The time is ready, not because we're ready, but because everything that was created for us is now ready for us to partake in, for us to enjoy. Yeah, so good. So good.
I heard echoes of G.K. Chesterton in this reading from his book Orthodoxy, and uh, I think Chesterton articulates what we're talking about as cosmic consciousness that he first had as a boy when he read Robinson Crusoe, and so I looked it up, and Chesterton says this. He says. Um, the he says the greatest of poems, referring to of Robinson Crusoe, is an inventory. Every kitchen tool becomes ideal because Crusoe might have dropped it in the sea. It is a good exercise in empty or ugly hours of the day to look at anything, the coal scuttle or the bookcase, and think how happy one could be to have brought it out of the sinking ship on to the solitary island. And so for Chesterton, there's this sense of enjoying, but also saving that which we have, this inventory of creation. And he's in his famous phrase out of this story is that the proper form of thanks, and he echoes here Gregory as well, uh, is gratitude. And a form of humility and restraint. We should thank God for beer and burgundy by not drinking too much of them. And there's this sense of both, as Andrew said, of enjoyment as gift as well as task to care for that which we've been given. And so he closes this. He says, Man had saved his good as Crusoe saved his goods. He had saved them from a wreck. And so I, the echoes to me, but it may not resonate with anyone else. Anyway.
Just a kind of a gloss on that note. Thank you for that, Robert. That idea of, David said modesty earlier. He observed modesty in Gregory. That idea of discipline, of not overemphasizing, I think is important. And entertainment doesn't mean to kind of just be lightly thrilled by jokes and so on. You know, at its roots, it comes from to hold from within the midst of something. So it's really talking about a principle of gathering, but it goes along with enjoyment. It's a lovely enjoyment principle of gathering. But think of entertain, attain, detain. That's the holding, the answer. So it's within, it's holding together from within the gift itself. That's another way to think of it too. I was very troubled by this word in another reading, and so that's why I looked at it. It doesn't mean to put on a song and dance or a spectacle for passive people.
I think too, like Unica really drew notice to the hospitality of the entertaining, and uh, holding that with what Andrew was and David was asking us to notice, that twofoldness. It gets me wondering about the parable of the prodigal son and our identity as both the older son and the son who took and left and returned. But going back again to that idea of the what is the reality, and in the moment, you know, this sense of the Father's holy kiss, and how do we receive it, and when the task may get in the way, or when the longing for play could get in the way of just being present with the holy kiss.
Mhm.
May I go back to the very beginning of that section here where, and I think, David, you pointed out the term manifest. So manifest, my understanding, means that if something is, it's something that is revealed. So it's not something that is created. It already existed, but it's suddenly made visible. It's given incarnation. It's given, and that's quite interesting because in French, what is translated as riots in the English news will be manifestation. So when people gather to express their feelings, and so it's called a manifestation. But the idea is that you make something visible for others. You express something that is there, that is hidden, or that you fear is not given the proper attention and presence. So what does it mean here? If the man was manifested, it's not created. So is it the notion of created and uncreated energies? The twofold, the two nature of man. One is already, as always, existed. I don't know. Why that term? Why not created, but manifest?
Mm-hmm. Of course, we have the fullness of the human nature is manifest in the incarnation, in Jesus Christ. And part of this banquet is in preparation for that. And that is also who we are. Yeah, very nicely highlighted, Sylvie. We just need to hold it together, I think, and see how this matures as we walk into this text. Please, Unica.
That line said the next step was that the king should be manifested. So I think there's a key there, right? Yes, Jesus came as a servant king to show what, the King of Kings would do as a king, to rule and have dominion over what God has created. But who would want to be served by a servant, right? There's only so much a butler can do. But what a king can do with everything that a king has, to be able to rule from a place of, again, abundance and rest. So I feel like there's definitely something there with the kingship of God being manifested in humanity. So I love what Sylvie said about the manifestation is the expression, right? The expression of God, of the divinity, of his royalty is what is birth, is what is manifested in humanity. And so, yeah, that just got me to think about what is being expressed. It's his royalty, it's his kingship, it's ruling from a place of abundance to give, versus from not having much at all.
Beautiful. May we move to chapter 3? Because it builds on this, of course. That the nature of man is more precious than all the visible creation. So creation comes to be through a word, logos. And Christ said, "Let there be." But here, Gregory, and he also talks about it being sort of offhanded, which I think is a provocative way of thinking about it as well. Then he goes on to say that the making of man, that counsel precedes the making of man, and that which is to be is foreshadowed by the maker in verbal description, and of what kind it is fitting that it should be, and to what archetype it is fitting that it should bear a likeness. So a divine word, offhanded, spoken, through which all accept the human nature comes to be. And a word only spoken after counsel, that is, a word made flesh. So is this lovely phrase of the word spoken in an offhanded way a kind of euphemism for the energy of God, which is everywhere present? And if the human nature is created in and through counsel, is counsel that its dialogical, its relational character, is that at the center of the likeness of God? That's a question that I have as I read this. I'm suggesting that we just read the last paragraph on page 197. Do you have the text, Jeremy Siemens? I can't hear you.
Yes, I do have the text, but it might be a slightly different translation. Is it oh marvelous?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah, would you read it for us?
sure. Oh marvelous, a son is made, and no counsel proceeds, a heaven likewise. And to these no single thing in creation is equal. So great a wonder is formed by a word alone. And the saying indicates neither when, nor how, nor any such detail. The two in all particular cases, the ether, the stars, the intermediate air, the sea, the earth, the animals, the plants, all are brought into being with a word, while only to the making of man does the maker of all draw near with circumspection, so as to prepare beforehand for him material for his formation, and to liken his form to an archetypal beauty, and setting before him a mark for which he is to come into being, to make for him a nature appropriate and allied to the operations, and suitable for the object in hand.
Should we move to number 4 and then we can circle back on both of them?
Well, I have a question before.
Oh, okay, please.
Is there, I don't really understand how the word council is used here. So maybe if someone knows the Greek word, maybe that would help. I don't know. if there is a...
It's a reference, of course, to the text in Hebrew, which says that in the creation narrative, how is it phrased? How's it phrased? Bob, surely to goodness you know this. I don't have it handy either.
Let us make man in our image.
Let us make man.
Oh,
Let us make man.
I thought you wanted the Hebrew, and I was a little shy on that. So,
Oh, you were, I see. Well, fortunately, your son-in-law had the Hebrew ready at hand in a way
indeed,
that we could all understand it. Yeah,
as usual.
yeah. So it's a reference to this curious text for people that are stuck on the surface of the text. But this sense that the Christian tradition has seen as sort of foundational to the understanding of the meaning of the Trinity. That in the Godhead itself is relationship, is the dance of enjoyment.
Thank you.
I'd like to add one thing because I've been thinking about this through the lens of attachment theory and the idea of the Trinity holding hands and looking upon each other. And some of the language that I will offer is that God, Father looks at Son and Spirit, and Son looks at Father and Spirit looks at the other two as well. But they're hearing each other with loving ears and seeing each other with loving eyes and knowing each other with a loving mind. And I think that the Trinitarian view of God just offers this beautiful landscape of abundant love that we can bring into this multi-faith conversation of how God hears and sees and knows just within the identity of God, is a pretty powerful view of love.
Sylvie, you were going to
No, thank you.
say
That's
something more about that, or no?
it clarifies. I was not sure if my
Yeah.
understanding was.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
What's it's to liken his form to an archetypal beauty? Is that the Logos seen in Christ? Or am I missing something?
I don't think that's missing anything.
And also setting before him a mark for which he is to come into being. I don't, I'm not understanding that.
Any suggestions?
I wonder about our final birth, our birth into our full identity once we die.
or when we die to self.
Mhm. Or every time we
The
die to
first
self,
death.
maybe.
Yeah. Let's build on that as we move to number 4 and 5. Number 4, the construction of man throughout signifies his ruling power. Here he speaks about the formation of the human nature made for the exercise of royalty, a kind of royalty, both body and soul. The soul shows its royal and exalted character, far removed as it is from the lowliness of private station, in that the soul owns no lord. The soul is self-governed. It sways automatically by its own will. He has this reflection on kingship and the way in which that's thought of in the ancient world. And then he makes use of that as a kind of metaphor and says that the human soul reflects the archetype. That is, the soul is vested in the purple robe of virtue, excellence, that all excellence is royal. In place of the scepter, leaning on the blessing of immortality. We have to remember, I think, that immortality, often often we make odd things of it. To my mind, at least, it simply means no longer seeing life through the lens of morte, through the lens of death. And instead of the royal diadem, decked with the crown of righteousness, shared in the beauty of the archetype. Righteousness it's also one of these complicated words in the biblical and theological tradition. It's so easy to think of it in moral terms, but I think it has more to do with being in proper relationship. Sometimes it's translated justification, and some theologies run with that. But as a little child, I worked with my father, who was a carpenter, and he used to justify things all the time. He would justify the one wall to the other wall. And that helped me understand that those words are about integration, bringing things into a proper relationship with each other. So in these passages, I think one thing to keep in mind is what is being said about the disposition of the soul. And also what is really meant by king and kingship, by dominion, by rule over. For us here in Canada, we have a king. And so we have some capacity to think of that in a kind of immediate way in terms of the shape of our public life. And Well, we can talk about that a little bit more. I think we should read all of 4. Andrew, would you like to read it? Do you have it handy? Yeah. And comment as you wish along the path.
I have comments ready for 5. We'll see.
Good.
So this is chapter 4, page 170 over to 171. It's titled that the construction of man throughout signifies his ruling power, his ruling dynamic, dynamis. For as in our own life, artificers, and artifice here is in the older English idea of making, not artificial. For as in our own life, artificers fashion a tool in the way suitable to its use, so the best artificer made our nature, as it were, a formation fit for the exercise of royalty, preparing it at once by superior advantages of soul and by the very form of the body, to be such as to be adapted for royalty. For the soul immediately shows its royal and exalted character, far removed as it is from the lowliness of private station. Pardon me. Far removed as it is from the lowliness of private station, in that it owns no lord, and is self-governed and swayed autocratically by its own will. For to whom else does this belong than to a king? And further, beside these facts, the fact that it is in the image of that nature which rules over all, that nature which rules over all, means nothing else than this, that our nature was created to be royal from the first. For as, in men's ordinary usage, those who make images, icons, forms, of princes both mold the figure of their form and represent along with this the royal rank by the vesture of purple, and even the likeness is commonly spoken of as a king. So the human nature also, as it was made to rule the rest, was, by its likeness to the King of all, made as it were a living image, partaking with the archetype, both in rank and name, not vested in purple, nor giving indication of its rank by scepter and diadem, for the archetype itself is not arrayed with these, but instead of the purple robe clothed in virtue, which is in truth the most royal of all raiments, and in place of the scepter, leaning on the bliss of immortality, and instead of the royal diadem, decked with the crown of righteousness, so that it is shown to be perfectly like to the beauty of its archetype in all that belongs to the dignity of royalty.
And I think we should read the last paragraph for number 5, that man is a likeness of the divine sovereignty on page 171. The last paragraph on that one as well, and then we can talk about them.
Sorry, which text?
I'm just suggesting we can read the last paragraph for number 5, 171, on page 171.
Would you like me to do that?
Sure. And
Okay.
then we can open it up.
Pardon me, David. So, the last paragraph, chapter 5. Chapter 5 is entitled, That Man is a Likeness of the Divine Sovereignty. This is page 171. And if you were to examine the other points also by which the divine beauty is expressed, you will find that to them too the likeness in the image which we present is perfectly preserved. The Godhead is mind and word, for in the beginning was the Word, and the followers of Paul have the mind of Christ, which speaks in them. Humanity too is not far removed from these. You see in yourself word and understanding, an imitation of the very mind and word, the very nous and logos. Again, God is love and the fount of love, both is and is the fount of. For this, the great John declares that God is of love. The word of is always a mystery to me, an ongoing mystery. Love is of God, and God is love. The only difference between those two phrases is the word of. The fashioner of our nature has made this to be our feature too. For hereby, he says, shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye love one another. Thus, if this be absent, the whole stamp of the likeness is transformed. The deity beholds and hears all things, and searches all things out. You too have the power of apprehension of things by means of sight and hearing, and the understanding that inquires into things and searches them out.
You identify with the description? It's describing you. Describing the human being. God is an iconographer. Makes human being, paints the portrait to resemble his own beauty. And the color palette of God is purity, freedom from passion, blessedness, all which helps to form the human being in the likeness, to the likeness of God. And that's the mark on our nature.
I love that. I love that in that last paragraph in chapter 5, he said the Godhead is mind and word, and then he goes on to say that you see in yourself word and understanding an imitation of the very mind and word, and then God is love and the fount of love, and so the mind and word is love. The mind and word is God. And so just seeing that connection and how he wrote that, that is who we are created in the image of, is love. And then the main point is on page 172, right? If love is absent, then the whole stamp of the likeness is transformed. Yeah, it's a really powerful chapter of who we are and who we reflect.
Mm-hmm. You had comments, Andrew.
Yeah, I want to walk back into this mark thing for a moment. That phrase which you noted, Robert, at the end of chapter 3, is really, it draws you in. It draws one in. Setting before him a mark for which he is to come into being. It is interesting when oftentimes we have this kind of sense that we're reading in English, and if we only knew the Greek, we could play with what he was actually saying, because the English we take as a kind of still surface rendition of whatever the richer language is. But mark is a very rich word in English. It means both kind of guide and path, but also the goal or the end point. It's kind of the way to one's own telos. And then he says in chapter 5, just the end of the first paragraph after that color palette David was talking about. With hues such as these, did the maker of his own image, and this is a living image, as it were. Right. So we think of ourselves in terms of image, creation in terms of living image, icon, a living icon. With hues such as these. Hue is also a very rich word in English. It kind of means complexion or texture, but also form. It's got a kind of element of form in there too. So it is a thing almost that is not settled, but in transformation. And on the next page, on page 172, after saying that if we turn away from love, as it were, we are, this is funny, he says, if this be absent, the whole stamp of the likeness is transformed. We really mean deformed. We're given the gift of our being, which is transformed in relation with others.
If I can interject,
Please.
when I was reading the word mark there, I didn't necessarily see it first as a noun, such as telos, but more a reason, an idea that it's the why of love. It's the ontology, the relational aspects, the morality. It's the reflecting of who God is via virtues and the maturity of the person. It's the why. So
It
the
echoes
scope,
there too. It echoes
the,
there too. It's good.
yeah, the scope, if you will, of the creation, the reason for creation.
I also hear a tenderness in that last line there too, with such hues as these did the maker of his own image mark our nature. There's a gentleness, the twofoldness as well shows up in this. To me, the mark, I think of the touch and the hues, like David was talking about before, the palette and the painting. And this gentleness, and with what Unica was saying, I think it's some of our evangelical heritage. This fresh thought I've had about the mind of Christ is within God, within Father and Spirit as well. And so there's the intimacy of the incarnation drawing us further in, that we don't just have the mind of Christ. The mind of Christ is within the Godhead. It's just this beautiful revelation.
May I go back to your question, David? What does it mean to be king or royal or having dominion? And so I don't know what was the understanding at the time of what it means to be a king, but what would be the opposite of being a king? Would be a slave. So if creation is out of the spoken word, and if we are made in the image, we also create through our logos, and we manifest things. So we manifest back to the righteousness idea. What is right is not being a matter of being right. I'm right, you're wrong. It's a matter of being in alignment with nature, with the reality of things, with what is. So being right, being free, not being a slave, being a king, not being a slave, is that you're in the reality of what is. You're in the presence of what is created on an ongoing, permanent manner, and you partake in that. So I don't know if I'm connecting things.
I like that. Just with one additional suggestion, without discrimination, because the king is over all. And I mean, even when we think of it in our day, geopolitically, one of the nice things about having a king is that you have a sense that the public world is not defined by politics, by being party pre. There's something even more than that. Not that those things are bad necessarily, but it's a recognition that there is something overarching overall. And the other element is that I think when he, of course, refers to, and when we refer in the liturgy to the King of Glory, it's the capacity of the human being to care for all that is, to care and nurture all that is. The deity beholds and hears all things and searches all things out. This is the last portion on 172. The deity, the archetype, beholds and hears all things and searches all things out. You too have the power of apprehension of things by means of sight and hearing, and the understanding that inquires into things and searches them out. The power of apprehension. To apprehend something is to have it arrest you, have it lay hold of you. There is wonder in that. There's real wonder in that.
I love that it says the understanding that inquires. I think
Yeah,
that goes to what you were just saying,
yeah,
right? Oftentimes we think that when we understand we're done and we've come
yeah,
to an end of it, where this
mm,
is like you understand and therefore you seek to know more. You
yeah.
understand, therefore you wonder about it more, and you for me, that goes back to love, right? Like this sense of intimacy, this sense of, because I understand you, I want to know more of you. I want to experience more of that. Yeah. And to know that the deity does the same, like to know that God, even in understanding us, is curious about us. That sense of vulnerability, like the relationship that he wants to have with us, even though he already knows. And yet it's like, but because I know you, I want to know you. I think it's so beautiful.
There's so much theological mischief that has occurred as a result of images of God as all-knowing, and that assumes all assuming, images of God as all-controlling. But of course, what's going on here is that there's this notion, this saying, but look at the human being. The human being is the image of God. This and the place of the soul and the will. I mean, Gregory's working with this throughout the work, wanting to know more, realizing that there's a wonder unfolding. If that is in us, I mean, I don't know about speculation here, but I think as you're suggesting, Unico, he's suggesting that, perhaps that's how it is with God. We're not finished. We're becoming. And that's part of the enjoyment of God, as it is an invitation to us to enjoy it in our life.
I don't know this question to you, David and Andrew. When I read The Power of Apprehension, I thought of the human imagination. And I was wondering if Gregory ever uses the word imagination in his writings. I mean, I can't remember who said it, but the we become, when we imagine, we become the most like God. And imagination is not fantasy, but genuine imagination gets to the reality of things. So when we image, um, truly, we image the real. And just thinking about your God as the iconographer, um, that God is the image maker, and as we also make. So I guess the question is, I wonder why he didn't use the word imagination here and perhaps other places. Um, I have no idea.
I can respond, David, but please, I want to let you have a word
Or go
first.
ahead. Go ahead.
Well, two things to be careful about. We read in English image and imagination. This is in Greek icon, and imagination is fantasia in Greek. It's not. And so if we're talking about working, making, kind of delighting in images, I'm with you.
Yeah, yeah.
But fantasia and that has more of our sense of fantasy. Same
Yeah.
thing, like construed apparitions.
Yeah.
But to return to that question, David, you asked, and Sylvie, you began to open up about the kind of exalted character of the soul. And this is looking back at chapter 4. Just to stay with there for a moment, and then I want to pose something to you, David. So, that the construction of man throughout signifies his ruling power. That's the chapter title. Depending on how ruling power is translated. It might be dynamic, but we also have the word dominion in English, and this is one of the words that
Yeah.
Gregory uses. And I used the word dominate kind of offhandedly the other week, and I thought, oh, be careful, look it up. You know, it doesn't involve to dominate or have dominion, it doesn't involve cruelty or imposing your own will. It's really from domus, to gather into the house and
Yeah.
to arrange things well for everyone there. So it fits with our idea of economia. Economia means the management of the gifts of the household and their proper distribution. That's what we're talking about here. That's one note. And then just 6 lines into chapter 4, I want to read a little bit and then turn it back to David. For the soul immediately shows its royal and exalted character, far removed as it is from the lowliness of private station. In that it owns no lord. I want to come back to this word own, and is self-governed, free to enter into relation, like Sylvia said, free to, to play in relation, not forced into relation. Swayed autocratically by its own will. Autocrat, that just means it's its own kind of guiding energy making the decisions. By its own will. That will right there is where we can miss the mark or fulfill the mark. So fair enough. For to whom else does this belong than to a king? These words belonging and owning. How do we, well, we spoke of the principle of gathering at the beginning, and creation belongs together. And David in his opening remarks spoke of, and Gregory indicates this, even contrarieties or things that seem opposite. There's always a kind of admixture there, right? Everything belongs. Man so far is almost presented as the principle of gathering, and here almost kind of explicitly. Owning, it owns no lord. The question of what is one's own is a deep, deep question. And the Christians answer it with one's own is Christ's own. At the center of us, our own is Christ's own. But if we're not our own or Christ's own, as it were, we're as it were owned by something else. And here Gregory is speaking not in, as it were, political terminology, but the terminology of virtue and passion. And so he's saying, as David has said in other ways, are we Christ's own, or are we owned by this or that passion? Am I owned by my anger? By my, whatever it is, resentment, desire, right? Who owns us? Because that's also the question here. And instead of just thinking like, well, we're all kings, so the rest of the world is slavish to us or something like that. But David, you've already massaged this by introducing the idea of kind of cultivation and caring. But what do you make, David, first, and then others too, of this idea of one's own or owning and belonging, and how Gregory plays with that in these initial passages? Anything that comes to mind, David, please.
No, very, very well spoken. In the Byzantine iconographic program in the temple, you have Christ Pantocrator in the dome, and right at the top of the dome of the drum. And often that image, Christ Pantocrator, all ruler, is, I suppose, literally what it says, the all ruler of the world. When you think of the architecture of the church, right at the very top there, you have cornerstones, but you also have this keystone at the top, which in a way makes the building whole. And the Byzantine temple is a microcosm. And that's where Christ Pantocrator, the icon, is painted. I've heard plenty of people think of that as Christ coming on Judgment Day, that kind of ruler. But what it means is the measure of Christ, the incarnation, is our measure, is the way in which we can take account of these passions that remove us from ourselves, make us slaves to things that are fantasies. And see in Christ the incarnation of this fullness of the human nature and human personhood. The rule in that sense is what holds the world together. And it is that freedom from all of our fantasy, all of our passions, that we see in Jesus Christ to be present to what is in the world, to the reality of things. And as a result, with ease, to bless and heal, to anoint and call forth and speak a word so that one can have a renewal of one's mind and all things are made new.
Can we say that, I don't know, but can we say that the incarnation of Christ is the fullest expression of dying to self?
I think others may have some comments on this. I would prefer to say it's the fullest expression of becoming who you are made to be and who you are and who it is the restoration which you've forgotten. So it's the other side of the coin, I suppose, Tara, when you understand self as ego. And the saints, many of them in the church, would love to say that you may be the only Christ the stranger ever meets. So if in fact you are without, if you are in Christ, if you are without, free from your passions, if you are in a state of apatheia, of no longer being possessed, the opposite of possession is presence. And then I think you go back to the earlier sections we read, and the way in which Gregory describes them is the way in which one experiences them. You know, we become much more alert to the joyous wonder of creation. We have come to our 2 hours. And I think we should probably respect that. Any final thoughts? Tomorrow we will look at the next 6 chapters.
Let's pause here.
Thank you very much.